Today, I get the privilege of having the reigning Miss West Tennessee for America, Heather Brooke. Welcome to the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I'm very glad to have you here. So, Heather, you are a beauty pageant contestant, winner, and then, as I just stated, the reigning Miss West Tennessee for America. And could you also share how old you are?
I am 43. I will be 44 in June.
Love it. 43 years old and competing in pageants. And that is just amazing. I love that. I want to hear so much more about that life. It's really completely foreign to me. And so I would imagine competing at 43, you're probably competing with women significantly younger than you. And so we are going to dive into that a little bit later. And so before that, I really want to hear about your life. And so when you and I kind of spoke previously, you told me that when you were a child, you had experienced some trauma that really played a huge role in your life.
Yeah.
What happened that was life-changing for you?
Yeah. So when I was around 9 or 10 years old, I was molested by an older cousin. And that trauma was something that I kept to myself. I didn't share it with anybody. I didn't share it with my parents. I didn't tell anybody what was going on or what was happening to me. I'd always been taught if somebody does something to you, you tell. But as much as I love my dad, when I was a kid, he was very much a hothead. And so I knew that if I told my dad what was happening, if my dad found out what was happening, he'd end up in jail or prison. And so I just kind of kept it to myself and I never told anybody. And that all started taking a kind of a toll, and it was building up and it was creating anxiety that I didn't even realize was happening. And then I was late in my around 10 years old, closer to 11, and my grandfather passed away. Right after that was kind of like a big turning point for me because that was when the molestation started happening. And then shortly after that, I developed a hair pulling disorder called trichotillomania. And that wasn't, I personally believe that that was a direct result of the trauma that I had experienced. And so it wasn't even something intentional. People hear like a hair pulling disorder and they're like, oh, like, how does that even become a thing? And for me, it was something very simple. It was that I had been holding all of this stress and all of this anxiety inside of me. And one day, by accident, or what I call intentional accident, I had an eyelash that was poking me in the eye and I was trying to straighten it out. And so that's why I say intentional. Like I was intentionally using my fingers to try to straighten that eyelash out. And when I did it, the eyelash came out. And in that split second, there was this immediate sense of just relief and release. Like everything that I had built up inside me just vanished for a split second. Very much I compare it to people who do self-harming behaviors, right? There's a release that people who self-harm get that kind of just for a split second makes everything go away. And so that's kind of what I compared it to for myself. And I didn't know in that moment that that was going to lead to a lifelong struggle with a mental health issue.
Well, now to go back kind of to, you mentioned that you didn't want to share with your family, with your dad, with your parents, what was happening. At what point did you feel comfortable to share what was going on?
I honestly didn't share that until I was an adult. And I got asked to participate by a friend of mine in a Denver Denim Day. We had there was a friend of mine put together a Denver Denim Day fashion show for Denim Day, which is a national day set aside to recognize sexual assault awareness. And so in this fashion show, all of the models in the show were survivors of sexual assault. And it was marketed that way. And they were going to be using my picture to market the show. And so that was when I finally decided to come out and tell my parents what had happened, because I didn't want them seeing it on online or on social media or anything and being like, what are you talking about? Like, what's going on? And so I was in my 30s before I ever even shared that with my parents.
What was their response like?
Very much more understanding than I had thought that they would be. Of course, anger towards the person. But my dad was actually much more, I think, telling him as an adult when he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't go back and change it. I think that was, his response was much better than what it would have been if I had told him as a child. Because I think he felt some guilt for not being able to, for not having protected me, because his own anxiety kept him like very much a controlling person when I was growing up. Out of fear, I think that something would happen. And so as much as he tried, as much as we try as parents, we can't protect our children from everything and from everyone. And so I think that for him, that there was some guilt there from having tried to protect me and still not been able to. But it was a much more positive response than I think and supportive response than I think I would have gotten had I told them as a child.
Well, when, kind of going back to when you were a child and you said that there was that situation where you pulled out that eyelash and you felt like just a sudden relief or release. And then eventually you started developing pulling out your hair more frequently. Did you, because you said you noticed that with pulling out the eyelash that there was a relief. Did you realize eventually, was this intentional? Like, oh, if I own hair, I'm going to feel this release as well? Or did it just kind of simultaneously happen?
Yeah. And that's the thing that is so interesting about this disorder, is that it can be subconscious and it can be intentional. And so for me, it started as subconscious. Like I recognized that relief for a split second, right? But it's just that. It's for a split second and then everything builds back up. And so I didn't even know that was like what I had actually experienced until years later. And I didn't start in doing it intentionally. Like I didn't start pulling my lashes intentionally. It was like that one pull, and my body recognized that, not my brain. And so I was picking subconsciously. So I would pick at my lashes, not even really recognizing or realizing that I was doing it. And then at some point they had gotten thinner, because I'd had really thick eyelashes, long eyelashes, and I had like Brooke Shields eyebrows. So when my grandmother was actually the first person to notice, and she noticed in front of my parents and was like, "What happened?" And so in that moment, like my little 10, 11-year-old brain didn't know what to do. And so I lied. And I was like, I was trying to curl my eyelashes with mom's eyelash curler and I accidentally pulled some out. And so, I got the lecture, stay out of mom's makeup, ask for help next time. So that was though when it changed from being subconscious to a more conscious. So because I did have thick, full eyebrows, like those Brooke Shields 80s eyebrows, I thought, I like rationalized to myself, well, if I just start tweezing or plucking my eyebrows here and there, maybe I'll stop doing this, because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know it was a disorder. I didn't know why I was doing it, or, that I even for certain was doing it. Like it was just kind of happening, and it felt almost surreal. It was like you kind of questioning your reality of like, did I really do this to myself? And if so, like, why am I doing this to myself? Feeling alone, feeling weird, like all of these different things. And so I rationalized to myself, oh, well, if I just start pulling from here, maybe I'll stop pulling here. And then that just morphed into, now I was pulling more and more from my eyebrows. And then subconsciously at night from my head, like my head, I wouldn't even realize that I was doing it. I would start picking or pulling at night when I was laying in bed and wake up with a pile of hair laying on the floor next to the bed and being like, what is going on? Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Why can I not stop? And that went on for a number of years, 3 or 4 years probably, before I ever found out that there was, before my parents really even much realized that there was a bigger issue there. And before we found out like that what I was doing even had a name.
So, okay, so I was going to ask you, at what point did your parents realize, because you mentioned that your grandma noticed it with the eyelashes. And so about 3 or 4 years, I guess what was maybe not the final draw, but like just the thing that made them say, wait a second, we need to take Heather in, and this is a really serious problem.
Yeah. So it wasn't even actually my parents. It was, I, obviously, like I'd started pulling my eyebrows, and my dad had read somewhere or heard somewhere that people shaved their eyebrows. So like he thought I was shaving my eyebrows, and I didn't want to be like, no, I'm not shaving my eyebrows. Like I'm pulling them out. Like that, when I didn't know why I was doing it, like I already felt weird. Like there was already enough shame there that so I just let them assume that that's what I was doing. And he thought I was rebelling. And so I let them continue to assume that. And I had really thick hair as a child too. And so it got to the point where I would no longer wear my hair down because I would pull from the crown. And so I started pulling my hair back in a ponytail and wearing my hair in a ponytail all the time. And looking back, I don't understand and realize how they didn't notice that my ponytail was getting thinner and thinner. But I would hide it in a ponytail. And I was probably going into either my 8th grade or freshman year of school, the summer between, when during a late night infomercial one night, I was watching television and there was this woman on TV talking about her pulling out her eyelashes and wearing fake eyelashes and wearing wigs, and she gave it a name. And I can remember sitting on the couch, like as I'm listening to this woman talk about what she's doing and giving it a name. It's called Trichotillomania. And she gave it a name. And I just remember sitting there like crying because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person who's done this or who's doing this. Like this, I'm not alone. But then she also said there's no cure for this. And that like was just like this sinking feeling of like, okay, so like even though I have a name for it, there's no cure for it. There's no way for me to stop doing it. And so that was a little sad. And I just sat there on the couch, like bawling. And a couple of days later, we had a swimming pool, and my mom and I were swimming, and she was walking out of the pool behind me and noticed through my thinning ponytail, like the bald spot in the back of my head. And she questioned me about it. And that's when I told her, I was like, I saw this infomercial on television. I think I have something called trichotillomania. And my mom worked for a doctor's office. And so she was like, she had actually heard of it before. And so she made an appointment with the doctor. And so I went in and got an official diagnosis. And then he sent me to a psychiatrist.
So, because according to the infomercial, there's no cure for this. So, when you went to the doctor, did the doctor confirm this as well and just say, you'll just need to go to psychiatrist or psychologist and get additional help?
Yeah. So the thing with trichotillomania, even today, so that was in the early mid 90s. Even today, there's still not a lot known about trichotillomania, and there's still been little research done on the subject. So there is no known cure. There's things that have worked for some people, but they don't work for other people. And so at that time, he was kind of the same way. Like he was like, I don't know much about it. I can give the diagnosis because this is what she's doing and it lines up. And that's why he sent me to a psychiatrist. He did put me on an antidepressant. He put me on a Nafranil, which like in its lowest dosage just made me feel sick. It made me tired. Like if I had any depression, it just made what depression I had even worse. And so he sent me to the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist I feel like she did me no justice because it was more like trying to put a Band-Aid on things. Like, let's use some CBT skills to try to get you to just stop doing it without getting to the root cause. So there was never any questioning me about anything I had gone through or anything I had experienced leading up to me coming into her office and what I was in her office for. And so as a therapist myself now, like my first session with clients, I get a complete background. Like, so if you experienced something that was traumatic for you that you're not telling me about, you're choosing to not tell me about it, And I'm not, and that's why I'm not able to help you address that issue, because I give you the opportunity, because I didn't get that opportunity. Because I really fully believe that at that age, had she dug a little bit deeper, treated the actual problem instead of just trying to put a Band-Aid on the symptoms, we might could have gotten somewhere and gotten somewhere different than what we did. And so that I've taken a lot of what I went through that didn't work and applied that in a different way to my therapy practice.
Now, when you kind of jumping slightly, but not completely, you are a counselor. And so you mentioned like taking what you've learned in your therapy practice. Do you have a lot of clients who struggle with trichotillomania as well? Or is it just kind of, it just depends on the situation?
Yeah, my clients kind of range in all degrees: trauma, anxiety, depression. I see clients with a wide range of issues, but since I started talking publicly about my trichotillomania, I have gotten more clients who do have trichotillomania or other sort of body-focused repetitive behaviors.
Okay. And so the importance of getting to the root of why this was happening was huge and should have happened to you during this time of your adolescence. And you shared too that there are some things that can work for some people that's not a cure or treatable, but there is something, or I guess there are things that you'd mentioned that people can do to help and that will work for some and don't work for others. What has helped you?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest things is, like I said, they started me on an Anafranil. That didn't work. I've been periodically off and on different anti-anxiety medications or OCD type medications. Some of those worked better than others. Personally, for me, some of the things that have helped were CBD. I started using some CBD, and that just kind of like calms some anxiety. So because mine becomes more prevalent when I'm stressed out, when I'm anxious or worried about something. So mine is much more of an anxious response to things. But also for me, I also recognize that diet changed a lot for me. And so, which is really hard because I diet sporadically. But when I am eating healthier for my pageant competitions, I notice that I'm not pulling as much. I don't have a desire to pull. That decreases a lot for me. And so, and also I'm a brand ambassador for HairClub. And so I use HairClub's Extrands Plus system. And that covers like what I call my hot spots on my head. And so because I can't reach those spots, like I don't pull from my hair often. I'll still pick at my lashes. I'll still pick at my eyebrows, but I don't pull from my head because those hot spots are covered with the system. And so those are just some of the things that have worked for me, like cutting out sugar. And with the best that I have felt in regards to my trichotillomania, when I won Ms. Woman Colorado United States in 2017, I was doing like no carbs. So no carbs, no sugars, nothing like that. I was just eating protein and fresh fruits and vegetables. And when I did that was probably when I noticed that my hair pulling was like at its lowest. And probably 2 weeks after starting to eat and incorporate sugars and those things back into my diet, I noticed a change in that. And at the time, I even said something to my boss at the time about it. I was like I was doing so well in like 2 weeks eating sugar and stuff again. And I'm like, I just felt more anxious. Like it wasn't even just that, like the diet changed the trichotillomania. It like literally felt like my anxiety changed with the diet too. So our diet has a lot to do with all of our mental health issues, not just trichotillomania.
Isn't that fascinating how that is the case? And I'm sure you remember this growing up. I just remember people talking about like, oh, you're like with acne for a side thing. Oh, what you're eating is not causing any issues for inflammation. And it's like, oh man, how wrong was everybody?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, so we talked briefly at the beginning and you just shared too that you started competing in pageants and you started competing at a young age. How was this introduced to you? Um, we'll start with that and then I have a follow-up question too.
Yeah. So my mom started me in pageants when I was probably 4 or 5 years old. I'm not even sure what made her decide to start putting me in pageants, but me and a cousin we would compete together at some pageants. And I won like some little local county pageants and some different things. But I enjoyed that as a kid and thought it was fun. And then after I developed my trichotillomania, obviously didn't compete for a little while and then started competing again in high school. Growing up, I always watched Miss America and Miss Texas. I grew up in Texas. So Miss Texas on television was like a huge thing. So every year I would sit in front of the television and watch Miss Texas and Miss America. And I wanted to be Miss America. And so when I got into high school, I did compete in those county preliminaries to Miss Texas. Obviously never won there. Then after I graduated high school, stopped competing. And then when I got married to my ex-husband, I started competing. I found out that there's Mrs. pageants. And so I started competing and I competed for Mrs. Colorado for 4 years and then went through a divorce. And then 2017, I competed in the Ms. Woman Colorado United States pageant and won that title and got to compete at nationals. And then I moved to Tennessee 2 years ago and decided that I wanted to. Pageantry has been a way for me to get involved in my community and to meet people. And so, not knowing anybody, I decided to reach out to the pageant director and got the title of Miss West Tennessee for America 2024. And now I am Miss West Tennessee for America 2025.
Congratulations, all these awards. Okay, so you said a lot of things that I want to get back to and talk about. Okay, first, where in Texas did you grow up?
I grew up in Teague, a little small town between Houston and Dallas, about 60 miles east of Waco.
I'm from Texas. I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, so I hear that and I was like, oh, maybe we'll see where she's at. Okay, and then the second thing, so you said too that you had stopped competing because of the trichotillomania and eventually you started back up again. And I'm curious to know because like I told you at the beginning, I don't really know much about the pageant world. I feel like a lot of people on the outside will say, oh, it's about beauty and it's about appearance and like that's important. I know so much more than that, but because appears to be part of it, how did that help or hurt you while you still are, going through everything that you were dealing with and as somebody with trichotillomania?
Yeah, I think knowing now what I know about pageantry, because like when I was competing as a teenager, I didn't know what I know now in regards to how important the interview process and portion of that is. Like our local director didn't explain that. It was just kind of like they didn't explain to us like how important that stuff was, and I didn't have a coach or anyone walking me through that and working with me through that. And so I think that it could have been more of a benefit to me actually had I known how to talk about it and been willing to talk about it at that time. At that time, I think it hindered me because I was still trying to hide it. And so I competed one year with a wig. I competed the next year with a really short pixie cut. And had I been able to talk about it at that time and talked about, especially with the pixie cut, how far I had come from having to wear a wig because I was almost completely bald to having this really cute short pixie cut because I was able to start growing my hair back out, that could have probably been a benefit to me. But I didn't know, like in the interview questions, like somebody asks you a question and you just answer it and you like answer it very straightforward and you move on to the next one. That was what I thought you did. That's not what you did. And so knowing what I know now, I think it could have been a benefit if I'd have been able to talk about it the way that I do now. But back then, I think that it was a detriment because it was something that I was trying to hide from people instead of being open about.
Well, and you also continued, you said you did the Misses and then you did the Miss Tennessee for USA and you continued doing pageants as an adult. And I'm curious to know, you share too that the volunteer aspect of it was something that was intriguing. Why is this such a big passion of yours, pageantry and continuing it? I know you also too just mentioned that you can talk more about trichotillomania and help other people too. So I'm just curious to know more of why continue. Why is this such a important activity for you?
Yeah, I think it started out as just me wanting to. I think it started out. I lived in a really small town in Colorado, like town of like 300 people, and it was a retirement community, so not a lot of people my age there. And so I think it really started out as just me trying to reach out to another group of women, like to gain friendship and something for me to work towards. Like I didn't feel like I was really working towards anything other than school. And so I think that that's really how it started as a married woman competing in the Mrs. pageant. But then the pageant director there at Mrs. Colorado, Emily Stark, is so amazing. I love her. She's one of my favorite people in the world to this day. The experience there was so amazing. It literally didn't feel like I was competing in a beauty pageant. It felt like I was at a women's retreat. And it was a completely different experience than what I had experienced as a teenager. And I noticed that women were there. At this point, I'm still trying to, I still haven't talked openly about my trichotillomania, and I'm still trying to keep it a secret and kind of hide it. But I noticed, like, I started talking to all these amazing women, and every woman was there for their own reason. It wasn't just because, like, obviously we all want to win the crown, but it's so much more than that. There were women who lost 250 pounds who were like there to step outside their comfort zone and to celebrate their weight loss. There were people there who got a new job, and their job was going to require them to start doing public speaking, and that way they were terrified of doing that. So this was a way for them to push themselves outside of their comfort zone to help prepare for their job. Like everybody was there for their own reason and for self-growth. I mean, that was really what it came down to. Everybody was it wasn't just the crown. And that was real. Had always been active in church and youth group. And so volunteering had always been something that I did a lot of. And so as an adult, I found myself kind of having gotten away from that, and competing in the pageant required me to get back out in the community and volunteer again and serve again, and gave me a reason to do that. And so that was kind of why I continued and competed for 4 years. In that 4 years, I never won the crown, but I did win some awesome awards. The first year I competed, I got title holder of the year for all the work that I was doing in my community, volunteering and everything. One year I got director's choice, which was huge because that came to me directly from Emily. And, that to me was just as good as getting the crown, because she had gotten to know me as a person. She really got to know my story. And she's one of the people who encouraged me to start talking about my story and sharing my story. And it was during the Mrs. Colorado pageant, during that 4 years, that I did start opening up about my story and sharing my story and talking publicly about it. And that was with her help. So that award meant a lot to me. And then I competed. One year I was pregnant, and I had my daughter in November and competed in February. And so I used one of my maternity photos for an ad page, and I got most creative ad page that year.
Wow. Well, okay. As you were talking too, I'm curious to know, in order to win the crown, what makes somebody stand out compared to the other person?
Yeah. So I think there's a few things. In the system that I compete in, or as the Mrs. America and the United States system, every system has their own scoring and judging, criteria. But for these two specifically, 50% of your score is interview, and then 25% is swimsuit, and 25% is evening gown. So your presence on stage has a huge impact on that. But even more so is your interview skills. And that's, what have you done up to this point, and what are you going to do as the state title holder, as the national title holder, and having a vision and having something that you're working towards is a huge thing. And being able to talk about things that, are bringing awareness to the pageantry system, bringing awareness to specific issues in your community or mental health issues, And so it really is about being able to be open, honest, and be able to talk about what you've done and what you're going to do.
Good to know with that. So in the midst of all the competing, you also became a licensed professional counselor, which you're currently practicing that as well. You run your own practice, and you had a meeting with a child client that inspired you to write a book, Where's My Hair? A Trichotillomania Story.
Yes.
Tell us about this specific meeting. There it is. Tell us about this meeting with your client, and then what happened during that meeting that led you to write this book.
Yeah. So, like I said, after I started talking openly and publicly about it, I started getting more clients with trichotillomania. And I had this little girl who was coming, this wasn't even what she was coming to me for, but she was on the autism spectrum. She was about 14, nonverbal. And she was coming for some behavioral issues. And she had been recommended, I was doing neurofeedback at the time. And she'd been recommended to do neurofeedback by her occupational therapist. And so her mom had brought her in. I'd seen her for a few sessions. And then her mom came in one day and said that she had started pulling out her hair and that they had talked to the OT about it. And the OT was like, she has trichotillomania, and then started giving mom all of this information about trichotillomania. The problem was they had the name right, but the information that they were giving mom was inaccurate. And so I sat down with the mom and I was like, okay, like this is kind of like, this is what's right. This is what's wrong. Like, this is the inaccurate information that you've gotten and that you've received. And so after that session, I went to look for a book like I do with a lot of kid clients. And this child, even though she was 14, she was at her intellectual level was much lower, probably that of an 8 or 9-year-old. And so I was looking for a book to read to them, like I do a lot of my kid clients. And I couldn't find anything for children. I found stuff for parents. I found stuff for therapists. I found stuff for adults. But there was nothing specifically for children. And so I sat down and loosely used my own story to write my book. And then I sent it to my mom and was like, okay, I just wrote a book. I want you to illustrate it. And so my mom actually sat down. She's a great artist. She sat down with pencil and paper and sketched out the characters and the scenes for my book using a picture of my oldest daughter as inspiration.
Wow.
So yeah. And so then we self-published in 2018.
Hey, that's amazing. I love that you were looking for this resource to help out your client, didn't see it, and you said, well, I'm going to do something about it. And so you did. You created this resource for her and so many others as well. Well, you stated too that HairClub, you're a brand ambassador for them. And so HairClub picked you up after your competition for Miss Colorado in 2017. So now you have a partnership with them. Mm-hmm. And they also purchased 400 copies of your books to send to their various hair centers. I'd love to hear kind of how this partnership was created and then also the impact that your book has had on others.
Yeah. So the partnership was actually when I was getting ready to compete for Miss Woman Colorado, United States. I had been competing up to this point with extensions, wigs, all of these different things. And I was looking for options. And I was looking for somebody who could like do sew-in extensions or something that was willing to do it for a sponsorship so that I didn't have to pay for it, because extensions can be really expensive. And so I actually found HairClub. Growing up, I'd heard about HairClub, but when I was growing up in like the 80s and 90s, it was HairClub for men. They rebranded, so now it's just HairClub. It's not HairClub for men any longer. And so I found HairClub in Denver, and I reached out to them and set up an appointment with their manager at the time. Her name was Jennifer. And I went in and she was like, okay, this is kind of like, she looked at my hair. She looked at it and she was like, oh, these are our options. And this is what we can do for you. And so they offered me a 50% sponsorship. So I had to pay for 50% of the system, of my system. And then they were going to donate the other 50% as a sponsorship. So we started there. And so that was how that kind of started. So they taught me about Extrands. Extrands Plus is a system. It's very similar to a wig, but instead of being a full wig, it just covers the area where you're balding or you're losing hair. and it's attached with medical grade adhesive or glue, a medical grade glue. And so I go every 2 weeks I have an appointment with them. But so she taught me about this and showed me what they were going to do. And I can remember getting my first system and like how good it felt. Like the colors were so great. It was so pretty. Sarah, my stylist at that time, who is like one of my favorite people that I've stayed friends with all of these years later. She was an amazing colorist. So like, it was just to look at my hair and be like, oh my gosh, like I can cut it. I can dye it. I can do all of these things that I've not been able to do or been too embarrassed to do. Was an amazing feeling. Anyway, fast forward through them educating me on the system, how to take care of it and everything. When I went and competed at Ms. Woman Colorado and won the crown, after that, during one of my hair appointments, I was kidding with Sarah and I was like, too bad I can't take you with me to nationals. And she was like, it would be really awesome if we could. And so I was like, let me ask Jen. So I reached back out to the manager and she's like, let me ask corporate. And so she emailed corporate and corporate was like, yeah, let's do that. Like, we'll send her out there to nationals with you if you'll be one of our brand ambassadors and if you'll do X, Y, and Z. So it started out as a local level partnership and then extended to their corporate partnership. So they sent her out with me to nationals. So I got to have her there for that, which was absolutely amazing. And then after nationals, they sent me to LA and I filmed the currently running infomercial for HairClub. I've done a number of photo shoots for them for their marketing materials. I'm on their social media pages, their website. And so that was kind of just where this partnership started, and it's kind of just continued since then. And when I wrote my book, they have HairClub for Kids, which provides free services for children up to the age of 18 who have hair loss for any reason. Wow. And so as part of their HairClub for Kids program, when I told them that I had written this book and shared with them this book, they were like, we want to be part of this and we want to make this part of our HairClub for Kids program. So they bought my first 400 copies of my book and they put it as part of their HairClub for Kids programs. And then they sent a copy to all of their locations across the United States.
Wow, that is just really neat how that all unfolded and came to be. Is it normal or is it standard, I guess, for when you compete in pageants to have a sponsor? Like, is that customary?
Yeah, a lot of pageants are really expensive. There's a lot of money that gets wrapped up in pageants. And so it is very common to have sponsors for different things. One of my sponsors this year, obviously HairClub is still one of my sponsors. They've remained one of my sponsors for all of my pageants. Brighter Images Labs, which is out of actually Dallas, Texas, did my veneers. Like, they're amazing. And so they were a pageant sponsor last year, continue to be a sponsor this year. But you get sponsorships for different things, fitness trainers or personal trainers, nutritionists, spray tans, nails, hair. You get sponsorships for whatever you can, or for whoever is willing to sponsor you to kind of help offset some of the costs of competing in the pageant.
Okay, so if, for example, if they, like a nail salon or the veneer company, if they sponsor you, is it that they provide you the service for free as long as you talk about their company, or do they also provide financially as well, or kind of both?
Yeah, kind of both. It depends on the company and the way that you negotiate that. For HairClub, like I said, I do photo shoots for them, infomercials, that sort of a thing. And so anything that they need me for, I've done their hair. They have a hair podcast. And so I've been on their podcast a couple of times. And then I promote their stuff on social media. Brighter Images Labs, same thing. I promote them on social media. I talk about them as a sponsor. I have a 1440 Fitness in Jackson is a gym that's giving me a free gym membership. And then you have monetary sponsors. So I have individuals who contributed. Last year, I did a sash sponsorship. So people donated $25 for a letter on my sash. you get both. You can get the services for free, or it's an exchange for something, advertising expense for them sometimes. So it kind of just depends on what you negotiate with that
Gotcha.
specific sponsor.
Wow. I mean, I'm just learning so much. And you're like, this is my life. This is nothing new under the rug over here. But I'm like, wow, tell me more. Tell me more. Okay. Well, I want to flash forward to your move to Tennessee and your decision to compete again at the age of 43, which you never, you can continue to keep competing. You didn't really let age stop you at all. But you ran against women in their early 20s. How did the fact that you were 20 plus years older than these women impact your decision to remain in competitions? And then I'm also curious to know, what negative beliefs did you have to squash, or have you had to squash, in order to stay positive about you and your value as a 43-year-old woman?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because had I been competing against these women at their age, I think I would have been more intimidated than I was competing against them at my age now, because there were some really amazing women that I was competing against. And like you said, a lot of them were in their 20s. The girl who actually won last year was 19. So, and I got second runner up, which I was super proud of.
Cool.
The girl who won was 19. The girl who got first runner up was early 20s, so probably 2021. And then I was 43, or almost about to turn 43. And got second runner up. And so that was really like exciting for me. And I was really proud of myself, given that I was the second oldest woman competing in our division. And was able to place that high. And then afterwards, to find out that I had done exceedingly well in interview. My pageant coach actually happened to be a friend of a judge. And after the pageant was over, she called, and when we found out she found out who the judges were, she called and she was like, "Can you give me feedback?" And I found out that I had the highest score for interview, and that I had done really well in interview. My stage presence was where it kind of fell off a little bit. And I completely understood that. But when we got our scores, there was not a drastic difference between the girl who won and me getting second runner up. Like, we were very close together. And so that made me feel really good. But I felt less intimidated coming in at my age that I am now than I think I would have if I was coming in at their age, because I can look back at myself at 20 years old and I didn't have the confidence. I didn't have that version of me back then would not have done well in the competition, because I just lacked the confidence. I lacked the self-esteem. I lacked the self-worth, where now I feel much more confident and comfortable in who I am, despite the things that I've gone through, and despite having trichotillomania. I can go and sit down with a judge and I can talk about it, and I can have a conversation about it, and I can tell them about my insecurities, and I can tell them about where I'm growing, and I can tell them about what I've done with up to this point. There's not at 19, there's not a lot you can say I've gone and volunteered and I've done this and I've done that. But at 43, I can say I'm run a business. I do this. I have children. All right. Like, I have life experience that shows that I can be a leader, and that it's a little bit more difficult at 19, 20 years old to show that side of yourself.
Absolutely. And just even thinking too, like, everything that you've gone through, and I know you've gone through a lot more that we just didn't talk about either, and the work that you've had to do there to instill confidence, and then to realize your value. And, your big thing is that you know that God gave you a story with a purpose, and you've done so much with the pain that you've experienced. I'd love to hear more too of where God is leading you with your story next.
Yeah. And actually, my book, I won for my book. I won the Inspire You Network's Children's Author of 2023. And in my acceptance speech, I had not planned on winning. I didn't think I was going to win. So I didn't have an acceptance speech planned or anything. And when I got the award, I was standing there and it all of a sudden like all hit me at one time that like as I was giving this speech, I said out loud for the first time, like I acknowledged for the first time out loud that I had been mad at God. And I acknowledged for the first time, like out loud, that like God had given my pain purpose. And like in that moment, it hit me like not just my trichotillomania, but everything that I had gone through had purpose and I could see how I was using what I had gone through to change people, help people change their lives, whether it was in the therapeutic setting or in my personal life. I was able in that instant to recognize all of that. And so I came home and that became my pageant platform was God gave my pain purpose. And so I started speaking on my story at different places. And I just created this year, I founded My Pain, His Purpose Ministries, which is a nonprofit that is, the purpose of it is to share Christ's love through podcast ceremonies, conferences, things where we're bringing people together who have a story to tell that found the purpose in what they've gone through in life. And they're sharing that with others, and that it's all based on what God has done in their life and how God has changed their life. So that we're sharing that story of Christ with others. But then to also be able to raise funds to provide free and affordable mental health services to people who are in financial need, who need it, whether that's you're homeless and you want services, you're in active addiction or going into recovery and coming out of an inpatient setting and you just don't have the insurance or you just can't afford the services. Medicaid clients, a lot of times there's a list for Medicaid clients, or you can't find a clinician that takes Medicaid and you can't pay for it yourself, or Medicaid says you can't have their insurance anymore. People who have high deductibles and can't afford the session payments until their deductibles met. Whatever the circumstance is, I don't think that people should have to forego mental health services. And so I want to be able to use the things that I've gone through and the fact that God has been so good to me and in my life to be able to share that with other people.
Wow. Heather, you're pretty special. I mean, I'm just thinking of just hearing your whole story that we've been able to hear for the past almost hour, and all that you have accomplished so far, all that you're working on, and the purpose is to give glory to God. When it's easy to either one, fall prey to victim or make it about yourself, because it's super easy to do that. And so starting this nonprofit is huge, and just sharing your story so that it can help somebody else and hopefully bring others to know who he is. And so thank you for sharing that. I'm excited to see where that takes you and just kind of learn more as well myself. And I am gonna kind of end with the last question. It's the question I ask all my guests, and so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So if you could encourage one woman who does feel blocked or limited to pursue a dream or a goal based on her age or a life circumstance that's out of her control, what would you tell her?
I would tell her it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter what your limitation is. The worst for me, I believe that the worst thing in life would be the what ifs. Like the what if I had done this? Like I will try anything that I auditioned for The Voice. I don't know if I can sing, but I was like,
Did you really?
I want to be a singer. I'm going to audition for The Voice. So
That's
I went
amazing.
to an audition for The Voice. Obviously didn't get chosen, but
Did you get on TV?
no,
Okay.
I didn't even make it that far. But I was like, okay, like the worst that can happen is like, I want to do this. The worst thing that in my mind is that there was something that I wanted to do. I didn't try. And now I'm left wondering, what if I had tried that? And so I think I would rather try something and not be successful in it or not succeed in it than to live with those what ifs. And the worst that can happen is that somebody says no. Like seeking sponsorships, the worst that can happen if I ask somebody if they want to be a sponsor is that they say no. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out. But you're going to always ask if you have something that's, first of all, if there's a desire in your heart to do something or to be something, most of the time God put that there. And so if God put that there, He'll also give you what you need to fulfill it if you'll just take that step to move towards it. And I think that's the hugest thing, is that like we look at barriers and that we look at age and we look at, whatever that barrier for us might be, whether it's a mental health issue or a physical health issue or financial issue, whatever it is. But if God put something in our heart, He's going to help us fulfill that if we will just put our trust in Him and take that step forward. And if it's not for us, the worst that happens is that we hear no. It's not the end of the world.
My mom always growing up would say, Erica, if you want to do something or you want to ask someone to do something, the worst they can do is say no. So it's exactly the same thing. And that's I feel like it's a good mantra to live by and to know that. And like you said too, that if you have this feeling, God probably placed it there. And if He didn't, He's going to close the doors and that's going to be a no. And it's going to be okay. Maybe hard. It may be hard, but it's going to be okay. Heather, thank you so much for your time. Please share where people can find you and your website and where people can get your book and anything else you want to plug.
Yeah. So my website is www.heatherbrookelpc.com or mypainhispurpose.org. I'm on social media, Heather Brooke Model on Instagram and Facebook. I am on TikTok, Heather D. Brooke. And my book is available. I have copies that I can sign and autograph. So you can private message me or email me from either any of the websites, or you can go to Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Wespo Press.
Well, Heather Brooke, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Erica.
Absolutely.